समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
India Today magazine has just turned 50. I spent 12 years working there at the peak of the magazine between 1983 and 1995. The magazine is bringing out a big mega issue to commemorate the 50th anniversary and also asked me to write an article on the decade of 1985 to 1995, which covers most of the period for which I worked there. I told you I worked there from 1983 to 1995. So here's my story, my first person second draft on the decade of 1985-95, and I will also tell you why I think it's been the most consequential decade of the last 5, at least of the last 5, maybe in a long time. Let's try and understand this. In a republic still young and evolving, decades would normally compete to be called the most consequential. But even put to that test, 1985-1995 would probably have the most stories that dominate our democracy and debates today. 95, it's 30 years since 95. And still those stories dominate our lives. At home in the immediate neighborhood, think terminal decline of the Congress after peaking, right from the peak down like this, the first coalition governments, Bofors scandal, the Mandal versus Mandir contestation, insurgencies in Punjab and Kashmir, 2 Indian military interventions overseas, Sri Lanka and Maldives, 2 warlike situations with Pakistan, exercise brass tacks 1987 and 1990 when Pakistan brought in the first nuclear blackmail, a fraught Sumdorong-Chu standoff with China in 1986-87, and then thaw with Deng Xiaoping, assassinations of Zia-ul Haq and Rajiv Gandhi, globalization of Islamist as distinct from Islamic, we told you. There is a difference. Islamist, globalization of Islamist jihad and its spread to the valley and freeing of India's economy. Although the decade started looking as stable looking as it would with the majority of 413 in Lok Sabha, the decade saw 4 prime ministers. Isn't that enough for more than just a decade, just 10 years? There's more. Because of economic reform, a globalizing India's stake and stature in the world rose, and just as India today became the most comprehensive and trusted chronicler of the change at home and around, its pioneering spirit now took its reader to the world, from the Afghan War, Tiananmen Square, to the collapse of the Soviet bloc and the first Gulf War following Saddam Hussein's occupation of Kuwait. The Cold War ended, as did apartheid. India and Israel became friends. We were also the first magazine to start sending our teams to cover the Olympics, Asian Games, and key cricket stories overseas. For good news or bad, for generational shifts and eternal debates, the other decades would struggle to measure up. That's the reality. That all the fears India had had since independence, political instability, communal and caste divides, decline of a stabilizing dynasty, the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty, nuclear and terrorist threats, social upheavals, loss of the most trusted ally, Soviet Union, all of these threats came true, all these nightmares came true in this decade is one side of the coin. How India responded, learned to trust coalitions, reforming its economy, repositioning itself strategically, and leveraging its human resources is the other side of the coin. India emerged much stronger, confident, and with rising global presence. Through these years, India today was at the heart of this transformation and often in the front. The first enduring reform for the generation since 1985 was Rajiv Gandhi's push for computers. The first computers for an Indian newsroom, a pair of boxy Apple desktops arrived in 1985. These were given an exclusive cabin, even in a newsroom so constrained for space. There was a crush for keyboard time as we discovered the freedom from finger-wrecking manual typewriters and the assurance of the floppy disk. Soon enough, Dilip Bob, who did the most editing and rewriting, staked out one of the two computers for himself, or at least pretended to, by having Shirley Joshua, incredible pivot of the process-driven backend, create a little placard that read, "This is the apple of my eye," and plonked it on the top of one desktop. That line of control was violated even more frequently and recklessly as the one up north by the bad guys. Since we remember the turning points in our lives, high or low by association, the first story I wrote on one of these desktops was the initial controversy over the Mandal Commission report in 1985. That story endures 4 decades on. L.K. Advani's Rath Yatra and ultimately the Babri Masjid demolition in December 1992 unleashed communal riots across states. Among the bloodiest were the Bombay and crowded, slummified small towns on its periphery. I'm saying Bombay because it was called Bombay then. In its wake came the serial blasts targeting key commercial buildings and neighborhoods. This wasn't India's first trial with a serial bombing. The capital, New Delhi, had had some following the Punjab troubles and massacres of Sikhs. One of these were also called radio bombings because bombs were fitted in radio sets. But not at this scale. Even the series of bombings in Delhi, including the radio bombings, were nowhere near the scale of these bombings in Bombay in early 1993. And not one so clearly traced back to Pakistan. The Bombay bombings were clearly traced back to Pakistan. That awful 3-letter acronym, ISI, made its appearance and has haunted us since then. Gangster Dawood Ibrahim rose from a part-amusing presence at Sharjah cricket stadiums, frolicking with cricket stars and film stars, to India's villain number 1 and continues to be so. Rajiv Gandhi's instinctive disapproval of the Mandal Commission report in 1985 sparked a backward caste awakening. Then, a series of errors with communal implications, reversal of the Shah Bano judgment, ban on Salman Rushdie's satanic verses, unlocking the temple site in Ayodhya. Thereafter, our politics has been a contest between two contrasting ideas. Can you use caste to divide what religion united, or employ religion to reunite what caste divided? Whoever wins rules India. Simply put, it is Mandir versus Mandal. The Mandal or the caste side had its 25-year epoch from 1989 to 2014 until Narendra Modi reversed the equation. Since 2014, we've been living in the era of Mandir or Hindutva, and it doesn't seem to have a half-life of any less than 25 years. The issue is still Mandir versus Mandal. It just played out in Bihar, as it will in Uttar Pradesh 2027. This decade's redefinition of national politics has been the most durable in our history. The same applies to political economy. 35 years after the reform-led boom, fears and doubts over opening up continue even now as we celebrate our successes. The strength and the beauty of India Today, the magazine and the institution, draws from what a fair, opportunity-laden meritocracy it evolved into. It was unforgiving always, even brutal sometimes. But if you had the hunger, diligence, talent, and also a thick skin, nothing and nobody could stop you from growing. When I came into the magazine in 1983 after covering the Northeast, I was warned it was a 5-star newsroom where unsophisticated Hindi medium types like me would be severely judged and discarded. But India Today evolved. My first cover story for India Today, by the way, was on Sunil Gavaskar after he scored his 2900 to equal Sir Don Bradman. I had never done any long-form sports writing. It is just that Arun Puri and Suman Dubey, then managing editor, thought I was the most excited, the most enthusiastic, so why not take a chance? T.N. Nayanan says, the India Today newsroom of that era was the dream team of Indian journalism. Proof of the pudding lies in Google. Look at the masthead of that decade and see where we have all reached. While a clinical meritocracy was key to this, there was also a concept India Today pioneered, the reporter editor. It wasn't limited to a reporter rising to become an editor. Nothing at India Today would be so simple. It also meant that even after becoming an editor, you would continue reporting, never mind your multiple editorial responsibilities. Here is an example of how we were taught to multitask. This decade also saw India Today launch five language editions: Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam and Gujarati, which I was asked to helm from 1991 onwards, in addition to all my other responsibilities and my own reporting and writing. Sometimes we were exhausted and wished Arun would acknowledge that, but he wouldn't. After anchoring an 18-page cover story on the fatwa against Salman Rushdie with a football team byline from across the world over 2 unslept nights, I sat on the news desk swinging my legs, sort of smug in satisfaction as Arun passed by. "Tell him not to work so hard, Arun, he will die," said then news coordinator Sandhya Mulchandani, hoping Arun would acknowledge it and show some sympathy. He just said, "Hard work never killed anybody," and walked on. At which point, finally, I list the 3 most important lessons that stay with me. 1. There is always the other side to a story. Unless you have checked with that other side, no story is publishable. This is non-negotiable. And if somebody complains about a story having been unfair to them, as editor, your default position is on their side first, until your facts check out. Number 2, anything that comes for free or easy is loaded with evil. Just say no or disclose and check. And third, be unself-conscious of identity in the workplace. No discrimination, victimization, exploitation or favoritism based on gender, ethnicity, caste, religion, anything. There is enough opportunity in this wonderfully meritocratic newsroom. That was the philosophy. Compete fairly and it will work to everybody's benefit. In this manner too, India Today was institutionally prescient. It was ahead of the new middle class consciousness for competitive equality that reform and growth brought in subsequently. Having joined in 1983, I left in 1995, just as the decade concluded. If out of the dozen plus history defining stories that I listed at the outset, I got a piece of all but one, that is economic reform, I would say it was a decade's life well lived, especially in an Aristotelian sense. And just for the record, I joined the magazine as senior correspondent in 1983 and I left as executive editor in 1995.